All right. Thanks for coming, everyone. I'm Emily Wu. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Assistant Director of Service Learning Program at Dominican, and I'm a faculty in the Social Justice Department. I want to start with a land acknowledgement that I kind of drafted up, and I want to be transparent that this is work in progress. I still don't feel fully connected with all the things that I write. So this is something I'm working on. Theresa, our guest speaker today, actually corrected me on a couple of terms as we're looking over it today, but I'll read and share with you. But this is why we even have the guest speaker series to start with, because we know that this is not quite enough. So let me pull this up. We welcome you into this space of virtual gathering. We begin by acknowledging that Dominican University of California occupies the ancestral lands of the Greater Rancheria and Coast Miwok people. As California has always been the home to the largest number of indigenous peoples and their cultures amongst all states, we also recognize our neighboring indigenous peoples, primarily but not limited to the Batwin and the Wapo to the east, the Olon to the south, and the Pomo to the north. We further acknowledge that Zoom, the platform we use for this event, is headquartered in what is now called San Jose, California, on the ancestral lands of the Olon, Temian, and Muwekma peoples. We acknowledge the land Zoom resides on as the digital platform is made possible because of the physical land and the indigenous people who stored it. Right, and I'll hand it to George.
Hi, welcome everyone. I'm George Faithful. I'm a professor of religion and philosophy, also in our social justice department. I want to welcome you not only on behalf of Dominican, but also to acknowledge that this event is possible because of the multiple sources of financial support we received, including from the Episcopal Church of the Redeemer in San Rafael. So thank you all of you who are here in connection with Redeemer, as well as the Wabash Center for Teaching and Learning in Religion and Theology in Crawfordsville, Indiana. And at this point, I also want to acknowledge that this is a collaboration with the Museum of the American Indian in Novato. So I will hand things over to the full director there, Tori.
Thanks, George, and thanks, Emily. Hi, my name is Tori, or Victoria Canby, and I am the executive director at the Museum of the American Indian, and we are located in Miwok Park in Novato. And we've been at the museum, the museum's been there since the 1960s, and I've been there for the last 2 years. And my background is Dene, or Navajo, and I was raised in Marin County. So one of the things for myself as the director at the museum, it's really important for me to work towards the goal of promoting Native visibility in Marin County. And so I'm really grateful for the collaboration between the Church of the Redeemer and Dominican and the wonderful speakers who've agreed to join us and be in conversation to talk about issues relating to Native communities. And one of the things that I've been really fortunate at being at the museum is to get to know amazing people like Theresa, who's a really wonderful and powerful advocate for our Point Reyes National Seashore, including the Indigenous communities, the plants and the animals out there. And so I'm so grateful to have Theresa here to share with you her story and her perspective. And I'll hand that over to Theresa.
Thank you, Tori, and thank you, everyone. I'm happy to be a guest in the speaker series, and thank you for the invitation and opportunity to share my story today. So my background is that I am Kewa Pueblo and Jemez Pueblo by birth. I was adopted also at birth by my mom, and my mom was Coast Miwok and grew up on a small cove at Point Reyes National Seashore before the seashore existed. And her family lived there until the 1950s when they were forced to leave by an unlawful eviction, and they lost the battle in the courts, and so our family left in 1956, and didn't return. So anyway, today I'm gonna share my story of the work, how I became to do this work that Tori was describing, and how I have, as a woman of color, as a Indigenous woman, how I have actually changed, or actually my perspective has grown. So I am going to click on my, I'm gonna click on my presentation, and then I'm gonna share my screen. I think
You might want to share a screen first.
Share screen, thank you. And then I'm gonna click on my presentation. And then I'm gonna hit play. So for folks who are listening, this is a monumental moment for me to be able to do this without technical assistance from someone else. So I really appreciate your patience. So my talk today is I titled it "The Innocent Appearance of a False Narrative." And so what you see in this photograph is a glass, like an 8-ounce glass that I bought at Toby's Feed Barn at Point Reyes, and it has a cow on the emblem. As I mentioned, my mom and her family, her Coast Miwok family, lived at Point Reyes National. I keep saying Point Reyes National Seashore, but they lived at Tomales Bay on the western shores. My mom's family was it was the last Coast Miwok family to live on the western shores of Tomales Bay. And so after my mom died, the park historian took my sister and myself down, and we got to see the house for the very first time, because after our family was evicted, my mom didn't want to go back. So I unfortunately didn't get a chance to experience the house with her. I didn't get a chance to hear her. I didn't get a chance to have her teach me how to dig for clams or gather oysters, because our physical connection was gone, though I think our family connection was never severed, because this house, the life at Tomales Bay, was always the subject of family gatherings and sharing stories and funny stories. So the reason why I'm sharing this picture is about how I have grown in my own understanding, in that when you go to Point Reyes National Seashore, you know, they have the historic ranches. If you go to the website, you learn stories about the ranching families that are out there. And you don't really see too much information about Coast Miwok people other than what you can find at Kuliloklo, or if you look up the history of Drake's Beach and the appearance of Drake and meeting Coast Miwok. That's pretty much limited to the presence of Coast Miwok people at Point Reyes National Seashore. So I'm sharing this because for me as a Native person, as someone who's written about Native culture, Native community, Native artists, my reaction after my first visit was, when I went to Toby's Feed Barn, was to buy these glasses as a memento of my visit to my mom's house, which tells me about how effective the replacement of the rancher history has been, that this Native woman who has direct lineage to the Coast Miwok history at Point Reyes National Seashore buys a glass with a cow on it. So this is, I want to share my story with you. And so what I'm also doing is I want to share my understanding of a false narrative, so that you can understand where I'm coming from and how I'm telling this story, which is about, I'll let you read the text yourself, but about this, in the example of Point Reyes National Seashore, it's the rancher history that you learn. It's the rancher history that gets placed on the National Register of Historic Places. And it's the celebration and the protection of the rancher history. And so the work that I'm currently doing is to insert and create space for Coast Miwok history, the history of my family, the Felix family, at Point Reyes National Seashore. And it's not so much to counter the ranching history, but it's to make space for the full spectrum of the histories at Point Reyes National Seashore, which also includes histories of Asian, Chinese immigrant workers on the ranches in the 19th century, Mexican families working on the ranches when my family was there, and also the contemporary history of Latinx ranch workers who work out on the ranches now. So when we think about Point Reyes National Seashore, we think about Drake's Bay, Drake's Beach, McClure's Beach, Kehoe Beach, Abbott's Lagoon, Tomales Bay, and we think about the beautiful scenery. This is a photograph actually taken from the path on the way to my mom's house, and you can see Black Mountain across Tomales Bay. So this is what most people think about when they think about Point Reyes National Seashore. What we don't get a chance to think about is the historical village sites at Point Reyes National Seashore of the Tamalhui, of the home of the Tamalco people, and of the village names like Calupa Tamal and Mochococha and Echacolom, and all of these names, which I'm probably not pronouncing correctly, but that is something that we really need the National Park Service to do, is to celebrate this history, teach us these names, provide a mechanism for us to even know how to correctly pronounce them. And that's what I want to see when I go to Point Reyes National Seashore. I want to see these names in addition to B Ranch, K Ranch, the signage that you see. And so this is from Milken's book. I thought I had the resource there, but I don't. So these are photographs of my grandmother, Bertha Felix Campili, out at the cove on Tomales Bay with her cow Babe and her calf. The photograph on the upper right is the little girl is my mom and my aunt Eileen. And then another photograph of my grandma on the porch of the house processing some vegetable, and then, the family dog. But this is the house that my mom's family lived at as early as the early 1800s. The house was built by my mom's grandpa and his brother, Ben and Joe Felix. And the family settled here. We're not quite sure about the history, if they settled here after coming out of the missions, or if they kept a connection to this cove throughout since time immemorial and coexisted both here at the cove and in the missions. We're not really sure of that history. That research still has to be done. But our family had at least 4 generations living on this cove. My mother's great grandparents lived on this cove, and then also the neighboring beach, Marshall Beach, were homes that the grandpas built there as well. But we don't really have photographs of the houses at Marshall Beach, and they're no longer there. But this little cove, if you ever go out to Point Reyes National Seashore, you look for directions to Marshall Beach Trailhead. And when you get to the parking lot at Marshall Beach Trailhead, you will see one path to the beach, and then you'll see an unmarked trail to the right, and that will actually lead you down to this cove. So my mom's family lived at this cove, raised kids. Actually, my cousin, one of my elder cousins, is the last baby that was born here. So they were born here, they died here, and they lived this very sustainable life. My grandparents and great grandparents, they worked on the ranches. They were ranch hands. My grandma was a ranch cook. So they made a life for themselves there. And there's actually record from Seahart Merriam, an early anthropologist, that some of the Coast Miwok families were driven off by gunpoint by the early Shafter Ranch family who wanted to get rid of Coast Miwok people And so because of that, you have to really think about, if you are so vulnerable that your family can have their house torn down in front of them at gunpoint and ordered off the cove. These families had to just get in their boat and row across the bay to the Marshall side and make new homes for themselves. My mom's family, luckily enough, were not driven off by gunpoint, but then later, 50 years later, after this event, by gunpoint, they were served eviction papers. But anyway, so you kind of keep your head down and you're not really visible. You're just trying to raise your family. You're just trying to live where you know as home. So years later, after my mom passed, and after our family was evicted, an artist squatted on the land and made an agreement with the rancher that evicted us and lived at this house. And then he died in 1995. And then the house lay dormant, neglected until recently. So after my mom died, this larger picture, this is what the house looked like. And it was in ruins. The park actually was planning to demolish the house. Twice the National Park Service tried to demolish the house, but the State Historic Preservation Officer declined the last request in 2017, and then the park decided then to restore it. So they rebuilt the porch and replaced some of the siding, which was made, the original wood is redwood. And then when they did that work, they left a dump site. This top right photo is a dump site that was there from 2017 to this year. Our family met with the new superintendent, Craig Kinkle, and we pointed the dump site out to him. And I have to say, to his credit, that debris was removed within the same week. So I was happy to see that. But the lower bottom corner is the side of the house that gets a lot of graffiti. There's my husband standing next to it. It gets tagged a lot. There's more graffiti out there. So, it's a house that is precious, but people don't know it. Kids going down there are taggers. They don't know it's a 19th century historical Coast Miwok house, or kayakers who come up, or hikers. They don't know the history because there's no signage to it. So my work has been to actually reclaim the house, using a term indigenize, to put myself there, put our family there. And so we actually hosted a friends and family gathering, and it was supposed to be small and intimate, but it bloomed into a gathering of over 50 people. And we had photographs, plants, flowers, things to humanize the site, things that I felt that our family felt would please our moms and our grandmas and our grandpas and all the ancestors that are there, that we wanted to acknowledge them and honor them with our presence. We had our nephew and his wife sing traditional songs and offer a prayer and blessing. We had a beautiful bounty of food, potluck. And so it was a historic day, in that you saw how it was in ruins in the last slide. In this slide, you see that it's loved again. You see that it was historic because for the first time in maybe 100 years, there was this land, this house heard Indigenous voices, Indigenous songs, Indigenous prayers. So it was a beautiful day. And then, I juxtaposed it with a picture of my grandma holding flowers, because that's who I'm trying to honor. I'm trying to honor my whole family. So I'm going to close out with this quote that I love from Indian Collective. We decolonize and indigenize spaces by being in them. And to me, that is so powerful. That is what I'm doing. And so, you know, what I wanted to share is this is how I went from collecting glasses with cows on it to actually really indigenizing the space by bringing Native prayer, song, presence, and people and reclaiming it as our family home. And then this last slide is something that, you know, I'm hoping to generate. One of our members of the Alliance for Felix Cove left me a little assemblage of shells and sent me the photo. And so then the last time I was there, I created this assemblage of shells and eucalyptus leaves to leave for the next visitor. And I, you know, invite everyone that's in this meeting space with me to go down, visit, and leave little shell messages or found object messages on the porch. This is the porch to the house. And I hope that, you know, there can be this messaging and this exchange and this humanizing movement that goes on at the house. And while I'm talking, I realized I forgot to do my ancestral acknowledgement. So please forgive me. I forgot to mention that I'm speaking from Vallejo, the ancestral and unceded homelands of the Patwin people. And so I am thankful and honored of the ancestors who provided this beautiful place on San Pablo Bay for us to live. So, but this has been my journey. You know, when I retired from, I worked for the Department of Public Health, my goal was to write a photo book on my family. And instead I became involved in this whole movement of reclaiming this place and working with the National Park Service and with the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria, who, you know, this is their territory. So we hope to hold some meetings and actually discuss the future of the house and plans. You know, my dream is to have a living history center and an indigenous plant garden. My dream is also to move this house back because if the global warming trends continue, this house will be underwater in 100 years. As you may have seen on the news, people are concerned about Stinson Beach. Well, this whole area is going to be underwater, not just the house, but Point Reyes, it's going to be underwater. So anyway, so this is the story I wanted to share with you. I invite questions. I invite you to come down and walk down there. I'm also, you know, maybe through the museum, you know, we can host people to go down there. And I also just want to end on this one last note that the Alliance for Felix Cove, which is brand new, we don't even have a website yet, but we're working towards it. We are hoping to host a Felix family row and paddle on Tamales Bay with the commissioning of a traditional Coast Miwok Thule canoe. So we're hoping that we will fill Tamales Bay with people in Thule canoes, dugout canoes, kayaks, canoes, rowboats, so that we can reestablish not only our connection to the home, but reestablish our connection to the water. Because my family and my mom, they rode on that bay every day to fish or get supplies from Marshall. So that's also the exciting part, is just, so hopefully in November we come back and say, hey, we're doing it. Get your kayaks out or join us at the beach to greet the Thule canoe. So we have some great things in store. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I don't know how to, okay, for some reason I'm not able to stop. Did I stop it? Yes, there. Thank you. So thank you everyone for spending your time with me.
I was going to add, Teresa, too, when you were talking about the Thule boat thing that we were brainstorming, there's going to be workshops with that, which will be making the Thule boats, harvesting the Thule, making the Thule boats, learning to make cordage, and then also maybe even a workshop with language and song, because that was a part of rowing. So this is like, it's a big project that we're working on in a collaboration, and I'm so excited that Teresa's leading this, that I'm hoping that this will be something by, like she was saying, November, that will be happening. But there's a lot of, process involved, which is really exciting.
So I realized that prior to the event, we didn't figure out who was going to be moderating the Q&A. Emily, would you like to take?
Yes, I do want to say something about the Q&A section. So before that, I want to say that because you all registered, I have your emails. And so if we have any updates about this, the events in November that Theresa and Tori wants to put together, we definitely have a way to notify everyone on this email list. And so you could stay updated. Yes, and so now we are open for Q&A. And I think we should do we all know how to use the hand raise thing? You could put your question in chat or comment. Okay, Stephanie.
Teresa, thank you so much. There's so much that's personal and honorific and troubling and institutional all at the same time. And my question is this: I love what you're saying about really calling on the National Park Service to do a more complete history, right? Because there's erasure and non-acknowledgement. And then you talked about the signage of your house, and I'm just wondering, like, your particular case is important in and of itself, and what we know is Point Reyes is important, but it seems like that's also like a process that could be happening across the country, right? And so I'm just wondering, what would be the process at Point Reyes for developing history, developing signage, getting permission to place it, and just expanding the educational and honoring values?
So as I know it, nothing can happen out there without, of course, the approval of Federated Indians of Greater Rancheria and the National Park Service. So it has to start off with the meeting between the family, the National Park Service, and Greater Rancheria. I have to say that Superintendent Craig Kinkle has committed to this meeting. He has agreed to partner with us. When he first arrived, because he is the new superintendent, when he first arrived, we invited him to the house. We welcomed him to our home, and family members shared the importance and significance of the house with him. So while that formal process is not really in my control, the public visibility movement, like the paddle on Tamales Bay, that is something that can happen without the formal process. That's all, all about visibility, all about sharing that story. And everyone that I meet, hiking or kayaking, they are so appreciative when I share the story with them. And I have to tell you, it's been an amazing personal journey, because when I first got there, I hadn't yet developed a relationship with the house and the land myself. And when I would see people there, I would get like real protective, like, this is my mom's house. Mm. And now, I have my own relationship with it. And now when I see people kayaking or hiking, I'm really happy to see them. and share the story. And they tell me, I ask them about their relationship to the cove. And they tell me it's their favorite cove to visit, or they tell me, you know, they like to dig for clams there. And so I really feel like it increases the extended family of the home, and that, you know, we have other eyes out there, because I'm always worried about vandalism. I've asked the park to put up webcams, you know, that they use for watching the animals, you know, but I have to say that it is really, it feels good when I meet people, and I feel like they also have a sense of the history of the site and are appreciative of it. So I really welcome people to go down there.
Thank you.
I think Jasmine Hobie, were you trying to ask a question? Because you had your hand up and then, or was it just a accident?
Yes, sorry. There we go. So my question is, what is like your favorite Native American tradition and why?
I would say the prayer and song. So prayerful song maybe, because that is what's moving to me, whether I'm in New Mexico with my birth family at Jemez Pueblo or Kewa Pueblo. You know, when we dance, I've danced ceremonially, and when you hear the singers come into the plaza and sing and talk about where we come from and the directions, that is so moving. And when we were at the Cove and our nephew offered a song by Ben Lucas, that is so moving, and it for me, it grounds me and it makes that connection, and it's a healing process. It heals me, and I feel like it's a direct connection to our ancestors in that moment of song.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
And then George, did you have a question?
Yeah, just a quick question. Theresa, I was curious if there was a further tradition behind your invitation to leave messages of shells and other things, or if that was like your personal invention. But I'm pretty sure my kids and I are going to take you up on that offer. So I'd love to be able to tell them the full story of not only the house, but also your reasons for that idea. But you also, it sounds like your one friend kind of inspired you.
Yeah, I can't think of a tradition other than, you know, as we walk on paths, you know, we'll see the little pile of stones, cairns, and then our friend and alliance member left that shell message for me to show me that they were there. So it just, I think it feels good to me, because it means that someone was there and acknowledges the family and acknowledges that people live there and acknowledges the appreciation. So that's it acknowledges the ancestors, really. Yeah. I can't wait to see the show messages.
Okay, we have actually a Jim. We know you have your hand raised. We had a chat question from Roy. Is it okay if we ask that question first? Roy asked, what is the role for the Coast Miwok Tribal Council?
Oh, so the Coast Miwok Tribal Council, you know, I keep in communication with Dean Hoagland, and at our family, Felix family friends and gathering. Dean and Jason Dreschler came. And also I've asked Coast Miwok Tribal Council to be part of the Alliance. So in the work of I'm thinking, this is a great question. In the work for the Alliance, not only do we want to tell the story of the Felix family, but we also want to create a platform for multiple voices of not only Coast Miwok voices, but Indigenous voices, people who have this tie to the land. And so, we are very, we have a friendship and a relationship with Coast Miwok Tribal Council. And the same thing, I also let Chairman Saris know of things that's going on, and we invite Grayton as well, and family members or citizens of Grayton Rancheria. So, we're pretty open.
Thank you. Next, Jim, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Theresa, thank you very much for this heartfelt interaction with history and your own life story and all the people who we're trying to honor. We at Redeemer Church are located on a sacred site, a shell mound, and find that there is also a mansion that was built in 1906, which is, I understand, on the National Register for Historic Sites. And the notion of changing the narrative is one that we really are concerned about, because I think the reality of the longer lived community in that place is not celebrated and lifted up as much as it needs to be. I'm wondering if, in terms of your home, your family home, there has been any thought of something like the National Register of Historic Places helping you to move toward changing the narrative.
Thank you. Yes, that is on our mind. And I have actually done some preliminary work with Dewey Livingston, who's a well-known historian in Point Reyes, to create a nomination for the house as a Coast Miwok house. I'm gonna plug in my computer. I just realized it is dying on me, so excuse me while I do that. But the house itself is part of the historic ranching nomination, or historic ranching listing under K Ranch. The road to the house is part of K Ranch listing, and the house and the shed, but it's listed for the Laird brothers. The Laird brothers used that road to load butter to ship to San Francisco. So what I actually would like to do, I just recently saw in the news that there is a Black family in Florida. I forget which national park it is, but they have a family listing. So I have already told the National Park Service and Grayton Rancheria that I wish to submit a nomination. And so now I'm thinking I'd love to submit the nomination as the Felix Family Historic District, because there's about 12 acres, and also Marshall Beach is part of the family, extended family home site. So we are working towards that, but we had hoped to submit a draft for review for the National Park Service and Grayton Rancheria, but we're waiting for our first meeting before we actually do take some action steps on that. But thank you for asking.
Louis, you have a question?
Yes. First of all, thank you everybody for putting on the speaker series. Thank you, Theresa, for opening your heart and history to us. And the work that you've done through the Alliance for Felix Cove. I wanted to know if there is a way that the community can show support and get behind the Alliance for Felix Cove. I have relatives that live in Bolinas, and instead of them going to restaurants on the Tamales Bay area, perhaps for like that money going towards something like Alliance for Felix Cove.
Thank you. Yeah, we are just trying to get off the ground. So we are in the process of developing a website, securing an artist to do a logo for us. So right now there really isn't a mechanism in place, but once we start moving towards the Tule Canoe project, we will be holding fundraisers with the Museum of the American Indian to raise funds for this. And so there will be opportunities to donate at that time. And then once we get our website going, we'll probably have a platform for contributions. But right now, I think the best thing is to go out there and get a feel for it and visit it and be part of this extended family of people who are watchful for it and can share the story.
Okay, next Molly, please.
Thanks, Emily, and thanks, Theresa, so much for sharing your story. There's a part of your story that I was just a little curious about, and I was wondering if you could elaborate on it a little bit. You mentioned you were adopted, and it sounded like from one Indigenous family to the other, and I was just curious if you could say a little bit more about how that came to be and what that was about.
Well, sure. And I have to credit my mom, my adopted mom, because she raised me knowing that I was adopted like I know my name. So there's no moment in time that I can look back at where I learned I was adopted. And she did that so that it would prevent any kind of vulnerability or harm that could come to me of learning that I was adopted. So it's like my name. My mom, my birth mom, who I know, and I'm lucky enough that my birth mom and my birth dad actually, after my adoption, they had broken up, and that's my mom was all alone by herself in San Francisco. She was going to nursing school. And my mom and dad, my birth mom and dad, got back together, married, and had the rest of my siblings. So I have 7 sisters and a brother that were raised in New Mexico. And when I was in college, I didn't realize how small the Indian world is. I thought I could go to New Mexico and just kind of look and see what New Mexico was about and where I came from. And I took classes at the Institute for American Indian Arts because I thought that would be a good way to kind of understand my ancestry. I walked into my pottery making class, and the instructor took one look at me and said, "Oh, how's your grandma?" I was like so taken aback because I at that point had not even met my grandmother. I knew her name. And so I going back one step further, when I graduated from high school, my parents, my adopted family who, raised me from birth, so they're my parents, they opened my adoption records so I could get funding from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, scholarship funding. And so then I got my real birth certificate. So then I saw who my birth mom was and my birth grandma. And so I went to the Institute thinking I could just be an observer, and my youngest brother was going to school at the same time. So that was how I started to get to know my birth family, is that one of the instructors who I told my story to said, "Oh, well, your brother's here." I never met him. And so it was the first time I ever saw someone that looked like me, only a young guy. And so eventually I ended up getting to know him, and he was the entryway for me to meet my grandmother, my other siblings, and then eventually meeting my mother in person. My mother, we met through correspondence because my enrollment numbers didn't match. And so anyways, long story, but I did correspond with my birth mother in the early 80s. And so I've been going back to New Mexico since the 1982. And so I have nieces and nephews in New Mexico that only know me as their aunt. You know, they don't know I'm the adopted aunt. They just know that I'm the aunt that lives in California. So I'm fortunate to know my birth family as well as my family that raised me, but I am enrolled. I'm a citizen of Kewa Pueblo, so I'm enrolled in New Mexico.
Thank you. And Laura, you have a question?
Hi, thank you. What an amazing story. I was just wondering if we have these historic ranches at Point Reyes. Have they been involved in any of the conversations? Are any of them allies, or is there resistance? I just think that would be interesting.
No, I haven't been in conversation with them. It's something that I would like to actually have happen. I have been in conversation with, like I mentioned, a descendant of the Shafter family. You know, he was going to set something up for me to meet his family. They're no longer ranchers. Yeah, I mean, and some of it may start with just reaching out to my own relatives. You know, my mom went to a few family reunions, but you know, family histories are complicated. And when my Swiss Italian grandpa married my Coast Miwok grandma, he was disowned by his family. So it wasn't until my mom was probably the age I am now, in her 60s, that she made connections with her Swiss Italian family and started going to family reunions. But you know, your question really, as I was mentioning earlier, it goes back to how we sometimes lose the humanity, you know, when we're trying to make space, Indigenous space. You know, I have publicly as an individual taken an oppositional stance against the ranchers for the environmental impact degradation of the Indigenous plants and animals and waters. But that doesn't mean that I don't recognize the humanity. And I know ranchers have worked and lived there all their lives. They're generational. And I respect that. And I think that that's what I would like to see the Alliance do, is help create a safe place for dialogue in which we can recognize our humanity and be respectful of our histories.
Okay, does anybody else have questions? If I may ask a question, and then Stephanie has another question. Theresa, I'm wondering about the issue of appropriation, cultural appropriation, and I, you know, and from your story, I think we hear the beauty of the complexity of identities, and you know, with your own background, you have different identities and different communities involved in this, in your journey. But I'm just wondering, you know, what is your perspective on cultural appropriation? Where would you draw the line when people go too far? Because as for, you know, for you to be generously saying, I invite you to become part of this larger family and this protection of this heritage, but at the same time, how far do you think is too far?
Well, I guess too far would be to assume what is needed and what should be in replacing my story with an outsider story. Too far would be, yeah, I don't know. I mean, that would be too far, I guess. Too far would be, we were talking earlier with George about mindful listening. Too far would be the absence of mindful listening.
Thank you. And Stephanie, your question?
Yeah, this might be a question that I ask all of our speakers because I'm very interested in the panoply of voices. When I've been able to be in gatherings with Indigenous peoples and sometimes with Black presenters through this period of pandemic when we've had so many webinars, I've been really moved and touched and interested to hear the invocation of the ancestors. And I think that many cultures and many traditions and many belief systems have some sense of relationship with those who have gone before us. But I'm not sure that the definition of that relationship is always the same. And so I'd love to know, in your honoring of the ancestors, remembering ancestors, or whatever word you would use, what is that relationship? And how is that relationship also tied in with your sense of closeness with the land and with your mother's house?
Well, thank you for that very thoughtful question. The ancestors, you know, I think are this continuous link, and that, you know, I think about my mother and my grandmother, my immediate family. I think about the people, the Coast Miwok people that I don't know, but I know who live there, who walked those lands and canoed in those waters. I think about my ancestors in New Mexico, and I think about ancestors just globally, because the spirit beings are always there. The land has its own entity, its own spirit. The water has its own spirit. We're told that, you know, when you look at Indigenous creation stories, we're told that the world begins in partnership with human, insect, plants, you know, animals. And so I think that when I was asked the question about my favorite practice in it, I talked about prayer and ceremony. That is, and even the knowing that there's things out there that I don't even know, right? There's the religious ceremonies where there's prayer going on all around us, even now, that we're not even aware of, but it's going around, and it goes around for not only just Native people, but it prays for everybody. It prays for humans. When the traditionalists say prayers, it's for humans, not for just Natives. And I think that I don't want to get lost. I'm trying not to lose your question, but that's the relationship that I'm calling to, and that's who I call to give me strength and give me guidance. And that's when I'm working to reclaiming the land and the house, that's who I'm speaking up for, is especially my uncle who fought in court. I feel like I'm picking up where he left off. I feel that pain my family felt when they had to leave. I feel the shame, and a lot of this work in connecting with ancestors, whether it's land or family members, is about trying to heal that pain, that shame, and to be very honest and transparent about Spanish language. My mom and my grandmas and my aunts and my uncles, they spoke Spanish. And I never thought about it until a few years ago, and I realized, oh, that Spanish comes from the time in the missions, the time when working on the Mexican ranchos. So the Coast Miwok language, Tamal, was not spoken, though my family has remnants of it, I can tell. They spoke English in a way that I don't hear anybody else speak English, just a few of my relatives. But yeah, so that's that acknowledgement. And I hope, every day I pray, I hope that I can honor them.
Thank you.
Well, that was actually a beautiful way to close, Theresa. And our time is almost up. Does anybody have maybe a last question for Theresa while she's here?
Well, I just wanted to say something real quick. Theresa, you just got me all teary-eyed with what you just said. It was really moving, and I just thank you for those words and sharing your story today. And then I just wanted to say that I've been down to Felix Cove now a couple times, and it is a magical place. There is just something there. And when we were at the family gathering, it was interesting because I brought a person I'm very close with. She's a Choctaw elder, and she was there walking around. She just kept crying and crying and crying because she felt so much love and the presence of the ancestor, Theresa's ancestors there, and just she could just really feel connected. And it was a really, she just kept talking about how magical it was to be there. So I do hope that everybody gets a chance to go down there and see. It's really a special place. So thank you, Theresa.
Thank you.
So if we don't have any more questions, Theresa, is there anything you want to tell us before we all leave?
Well, thank you for sharing the lunch hour with me, and keep in touch with Tori. And as soon as we get our website up and running, we can share it. And yeah, I think this year is going to be an exciting year. And I was telling another friend, Karina Gould from Segura Rete, about the boating idea, the canoe idea. And she said, oh, it gives me shivers. And I said, yeah, I have shivers too. And she said, well, that means it's going to happen. So if anyone has connections with funders, that would be great too, because I know we asked about individuals, but we're looking for also some larger base foundational support so that we can really pay for Native family community members, to pay for kayak lessons, pay for them to have a kayak company go out there and with them on the day of the event. And so we're really trying to make it an accessible, really just fill that bay with people. So that's what we're looking for additional funding for, is to make it assure that that bay is filled with people in honor of the Felix family. So thank you.
Thank you, Theresa. And the session is recorded, so maybe we could show this to the funders too, right? So that they could hear your story. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining us during this hour. Our next guest speaker will be in 2 weeks. So, and if you register for it, please, we will be happy for you to join us again. Thank you so much. Thank you, Theresa.
Thank you.